They called it connubium, but it was never union, it was transaction. In ancient Rome, a woman's worth was measured in the shape of her womb, and her fate in the gender of her child. Sons meant honor, daughters meant shame. And no child at all? That was a crime against legacy, punished not by law but by silence, starvation, and exile. In marble halls built for men's names, wives like Livia were trained to smile while disappearing. This is the story Rome refused to carve in stone what husbands did to wives who couldn't give them sons. The morning of her wedding smelled like crushed lavender and old fear. Livia stood still as 4 attendants pinned the saffron veil to her braided hair, each tug a silent command to behave, obey, produce. At 15, she had been chosen an honor, her father said, to marry into the house of Cornelius, a senator's family steeped in ancient blood. But no one asked if Livia wanted this honor. No one asked if she felt the panic blooming in her chest as the veil dropped over her eyes like a shroud. Gaius was twice her age, with a voice that never rose and hands that never trembled, not even when he placed the iron ring on her finger before witnesses. That night, as tradition demanded, she was escorted to the bridal chamber by women who whispered prayers she didn't understand. They left her in silence. Gaius undressed her like peeling fruit methodically, without hunger, without cruelty. When it was done, he stood, fastened his belt, and muttered, "Let the gods grant you a son." Then he left. Livia bled alone into the wedding linens. Days became rituals. She learned to rise before the light, to dress in stola and silence, to offer honey cakes at the lararium and smile when the elder women prodded her belly. A month passed. Then, too, Gaius barely looked at her. By the 3rd moon, the whispers began. The cook left fennel and goat's milk in her room, old wives' methods to stir fertility. Her mother wrote, urging her to lie on her left side after the act. No one mentioned love. That word belonged to poets, not wives. One morning, Livia fainted by the fountain, and the physician declared her with child. The villa erupted in relief. But no one celebrated her, only the hope that she had begun to earn her keep. She was a vessel now, a body with a deadline. And in the dead of night, when pain twisted her spine and sleep would not come, she pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered, "Please, be a boy." Because in Rome, daughters were a delay, sons were salvation, and if she failed, there would be no second ceremony, only silence. The labor came early, a storm of blood and breath that clawed through her before the midwife had time to lay down the cloths. Livia screamed only once. The rest she swallowed. Roman wives were not meant to cry during birth, they were meant to endure, like marble columns holding up the names of men. When it was done, when the afterbirth was taken away and the iron tools rinsed clean, the midwife held up the child and said nothing, no triumph, no blessing. Just a flicker of eyes between her and the nurse, a silence that told Livia everything. The child was a girl. Her daughter was wrapped not in blue-dyed swaddling, but in a plain linen scrap stained at the hem. Gaius entered briefly, looked once at the bundle, and left without touching it. No name was spoken, no coin was pressed into the midwife's hand. Livia waited for him to return, but the sandals passed her door without pause. For 3 days, she lay in a fever, her breasts engorged, her body hollowed. When she finally stood, it was to find her daughter in the arms of an elderly wet nurse with clouded eyes and a voice like rusted bronze. "She drinks well," the nurse said gently. But Livia only nodded, because drinking well meant nothing if the child's sex had already cursed her. That night, she found her jewelry missing small rings and pins she had worn since girlhood, gone from their carved box. The maid said nothing. The cook no longer bowed. The household had shifted. She was a woman who had failed. Romans believed in signs. When a hawk circled the roof tiles 2 mornings in a row, the servants murmured that the gods were watching. When the neighbor's dog howled at dusk, they turned their backs to Livia, as if her presence alone invited misfortune. Even her mother's letters grew colder. "Try again," one said, "and pray harder this time." Livia tried to love the child. She held her close in secret, tracing the faint lines of her daughter's face, whispering stories about women who had risen in silence. But outside that nursery door, Her daughter was invisible, a temporary thing. At dinner, Gaius toasted future heirs without glancing her way. When guests arrived, Livia was seated near the end of the table, her words ignored like background noise. In the temple of Juno Lucina, she left an offering of amber beads and bent her knees until they bruised. The priestess accepted her coin but gave no blessing. On the way home, Livia saw a noblewoman cradling twin boys in the forum and felt a sudden shame so sharp it burned her throat. She didn't cry. Roman wives didn't cry. They waited, they prayed, and they bled again. And in their hearts, they learned what every Roman girl eventually did. Daughters may be born of their bodies, but only sons could save their names. The courtyard whispered when she passed, not with words, but with the sudden shifting of eyes, the tightening of lips, the way laughter died just a moment too quickly. Livia felt it in her bones, the new weight of being watched not with interest, but with polite pity. Women no longer lingered with her after festivals. The baker's wife, once eager to share temple gossip, now gave brief nods and excuses. Even the slaves had begun to speak softly when she entered a room, as if her presence called forth misfortune they hoped to avoid. Word had spread, a daughter and nothing more. No son, no heir, no blessing. The shame wrapped around her like her stola, heavy and visible no matter how straight she stood. One afternoon, as she watered the laurel near the eastern wall, two of Gaius's cousins walked the colonnade in quiet conversation. They thought her too far to hear. One spoke plainly, "Perhaps she is barren. The gods do not always favor even the best bloodlines." The other answered, "Or cursed." Either way, he must think of the family's future. Livia's hands trembled, but she kept watering. She would not give them the satisfaction of turning. That night, a clay jar was placed at her bedside, filled with a thick herbal mixture that reeked of fennel and mare's milk. No explanation. The same night, the family physician arrived without invitation, asked to examine her pulse, her womb, her breath. He reported nothing aloud but met Gaius in the study after. Doors closed. The next morning, her maid was replaced. The new one was younger, sharper, and more silent. Livia was asked to eat alone more often. At dinner, when male guests visited, Gaius would speak of civic duties, inheritance laws, the strength of Roman sons, always Roman sons, while never once acknowledging the daughter who toddled in the nursery. Drusilla, a cousin from the south, came to stay. She was 13, lithe, with dark, clever eyes and hands that always seemed folded in modest obedience. Livia watched her learn the villa's rhythm, watched her laugh softly when Gaius passed, watched how the servants began to hover near her, favor her. On the third day, she saw Drusilla wearing one of her discarded bracelets. It was not a theft. It was a quiet transition. A woman of value had to prove herself in fruit, not in loyalty or devotion. Livia knew what came next. The whispers would become suggestions, the suggestions would become decisions, and decisions would become history. In Rome, a wife who bore no son, faded like old paint on villa walls, noticed only when someone came to repaint her. Livia touched her belly that night and felt nothing. No stir, no sign. And in the stillness, she began to understand that her time was being measured not in months or seasons, but in wombful silences the house could no longer afford. The second birth came with no warning and no midwife. Blood soaked the sheets before the sun had risen, and the cries that followed were brief, wet, and wrong. Livia held the boy for less than a minute. He was small, blue-tinged, and silent. The nurse tried to coax breath with warm cloths and whispered invocations to Juno, but the child never opened his eyes. Gaius entered only once, looked at the boy's limp form, and said, "A waste," before turning back into the corridor. Livia didn't scream. She clutched the body close to her chest until the nurse pried it free. The cradle carved months earlier from olive wood remained untouched. No lullabies would soften the house that day. There was no funeral, no coin under the tongue, no incense in the temple. The body was taken away in a wrapped cloth, and when Livia asked where he had been buried, the physician said flatly, "There is no record. The gods," he explained, "do not keep ledgers for stillborns." That night, she heard the sound of fire in the garden, and saw smoke rising through the open roof of the atrium. She walked barefoot toward it, dizzy from blood loss, only to find the olive cradle burning in a neat pile. Her husband stood beside it with a torch in one hand and a goblet in the other. "No point in keeping it," he said. "You will make another." Livia said nothing. Her feet ached from the cold stone, but she didn't return inside, not until the cradle was ash. The next morning, her room was locked from the outside. A servant brought her water and boiled wheat. No wine, no salt. The nurse was dismissed. For 2 days she lay on her side, fever rising, the blood never fully stopping. The physician did not return. On the third night, Gaius visited her room. He did not enter. He spoke through the door. "The Senate watches men who fail to produce heirs. Do not make me look like a fool." Then silence. After he left, Livia curled into herself and whispered the boy's name, not a Roman name, not one from his family line, but one from her grandmother's village, whispered only once, into the air, as if the wind might carry it to the underworld, where nameless children waited to be remembered. In the darkness, she realized she no longer feared exile, she feared replacement, because exile was quiet, but being replaced was slow, public erasure. And in Rome, no punishment hurt more than watching someone else walk the path that should have been yours with your jewelry, your title, your husband's eyes fixed on a younger womb. The priest arrived at midday, robes bright with purple thread, sandals dustless despite the walk from the temple. He did not greet Livia, only nodded toward her as he passed, as one might acknowledge a statue or a piece of furniture. Gaius welcomed him with outstretched arms, poured wine, and gestured to the central hall where the family's ancestral busts lined the wall, men with stern faces, marble eyes, and names that echoed through Senate records. "Legacy," the priest said, touching the brow of one with a golden laurel. "Rome thrives on it." Livia sat across from them, dressed in clean linen, her hands folded as she had been taught. She had not been invited to speak. The priest began a recitation not of blessings, but of laws. He spoke of the ius trium liberorum, the law of 3 children. Women who bore 3 sons earned legal freedoms, exemption from guardianship, the right to own property, respect in public. Those who failed remained legally dependent, subject to their husbands, their fathers, even their sons if they ever had any. "A womb that produces sons," the priest said, "elevates the mother and the house." Then he turned to Livia. "Yours has not." Gaius did not correct him. The words hung in the warm air like incense. When the priest departed, Gaius summoned a scribe and dictated a letter to his brother in the north, requests for lineage charts, inquiries into suitable girls of age, ones with strong hips and no family scandals. Livia stood nearby, invisible, as her replacement was arranged. She did not weep. She walked to the nursery and found her daughter's cot gone. In its place stood a writing desk. When she asked where the child had been taken, the servant replied, "The countryside, better air for her lungs." Livia was not told which villa. That evening, Drusilla appeared in the dining hall in Livia's green stola. Her hair had been coiled in the Cornelian fashion, and she wore a gold pin once gifted to Livia by her aunt. She looked, Livia thought, like a smaller version of the woman Gaius imagined his wife should be: fertile, modest, quiet, unbloodied by failure. The household adjusted quickly. Servants asked Drusilla what she wanted for supper. The steward called her Domina once, then again. Livia walked the perimeter of the villa at dusk, her sandals soft on the stone, her hands trembling with cold. In a shadowed alcove, she saw the priest again speaking to Gaius under torchlight. Their voices were low, but she heard enough. "1 more year," the priest said. "Then the Senate will question the union. You must act." That night, Livia took the last coin she owned and placed it beneath the household altar, not to beg for a son, not for mercy, but as a bribe to any god or ghost who might remember her name after the walls of this house forgot it. The northern wing of the villa was never used. Dust settled thick along the mosaic tiles, and ivy pressed through cracks in the marble columns. Servants said the walls were colder there, even in summer. When Livia wandered there one morning, half from grief, half from growing invisibility, She found a door she had never seen before, narrow and warped, set into the stone like an afterthought. It creaked open without resistance. Inside, the air was still. The room was lined with portraits, not of ancestors, not of senators, but of women. Their eyes followed her oil-painted stares, frozen in quiet despair, their mouths soft with a sadness Livia recognized too well. There were no plaques, no names carved beneath the frames, only initials scratched faintly in the wood. A few bore broken glass. Some were missing entirely, marked only by a nail and a square of paler wall where their faces had once hung. One portrait, cracked at the corner, showed a woman with dark curls and a red garnet necklace Livia had once found in a locked drawer. Her face was not familiar, but her expression was, the look of someone who had once believed obedience was enough. Livia stood in the center of the room, heart pounding, until a voice behind her broke the silence. "Your wife, number 5. It was the old stewardess, a servant so ancient and quiet most had forgotten she could still speak. Her eyes were cloudy, her voice brittle. "They come through here," she said, "the ones who fail, one by one. Some last months. You've lasted the longest." Livia turned slowly, asking, "What happened to them?" The woman shrugged. "Gone. Some sent to temples, some to distant estates." One jumped from the roof. Livia swallowed hard. "Why keep their portraits?" The stewardess gave a thin smile. "Gaius honors memory, but only privately. Publicly, they never existed." That night, Livia returned to the room and lit a single candle. She touched each frame with the tips of her fingers, murmuring whatever names came to her: Flavia, Junia, Claudia, names stolen from tombstones and fading letters. For the first time, she understood that this house did not erase women with violence, it erased them with indifference. It left them to rot in silence, sealed behind doors no one visited, a hall of ghosts, each one painted pretty and then abandoned. When she emerged, the light in the atrium had changed. Drusilla now walked with her hand on her belly, the servants whispering blessings. Gaius stood taller, his voice louder at the table. Livia was not dismissed, not yet, but she had been catalogued, framed, waiting, and in the back of her mind, she began composing her own portrait, one not made of paint, but of memory and witness. Because if Rome would not let her leave a name, she would leave a warning. The curtains were changed without her noticing, soft gold, trimmed in burgundy, Drusilla's colors. Livia's blue silks were folded and packed by someone else's hands, and her combs vanished from the basin shelf. No one said she was being replaced. No one had to. It happened the Roman way, quietly, with order, with ceremony disguised as kindness. She was given a smaller room near the servants' quarters. "For peace," Gaius said, "you need rest, reflection." The door did not lock from within. Her meals were simpler now, stewed lentils, barley, unseasoned. She was not invited to the main table, but occasionally summoned when foreign guests visited, to sit and smile, to give the appearance of harmony. She said little. She had learned by now that silence was a survival tactic, but silence, too, had limits. One morning, she asked after her daughter. The steward looked confused, as if Livia had spoken of someone long buried. "You mean the girl?" he said. "I believe she was sent east, a relative's estate, something about illness. No letter, no name, just east." That evening, she stood at the household altar and lit 3 candles, one for her daughter, one for the child who had not drawn breath, and one for the version of herself she could no longer find. The flames flickered, weak against the gathering dusk. Drusilla's presence grew like ivy through the halls. She walked without hesitation now, her voice low and practiced, her hand often resting on her swelling belly, as if to remind everyone of her power. Gaius began referring to the future mother of my son in conversation, never once saying her name. Livia was addressed only in formalities. Domina Livia when necessary, never wife, never mother. One afternoon, a group of visiting senators arrived, and Gaius paraded Drusilla before them, her stola fitted to show her condition. Livia stood at the edge of the peristyle, watching from the shadows, unseen. She thought of the room of forgotten wives. She wondered if Drusilla would hang there one day, or if the child would save her. Perhaps the portraits were not warnings. Perhaps they were prayers that had failed. A week later, a messenger arrived with a scroll bearing Gaius's seal. It was not handed to her directly. The steward read it aloud. You are to travel to the coastal estate. A change of air, a chance for rest. The physician recommends it. She knew the estate. Remote, wind-beaten, surrounded by olive groves no one harvested. It was where the third wife had been sent. No one had seen her since. Livia packed in silence. Only the old stewardess lingered in the corridor as she passed, nodding once, as if to say, "It has come." But Livia did not cry. She looked once more at the walls of the home that had devoured her youth, and she walked toward Exile, not as a wife dismissed, but as a witness carrying every name the house hoped to forget. The house was quieter now, older. The paint along the columns had faded, and ivy curled up from the base of the outer walls like veins returning to the heart. The girl stepped over the threshold, wearing a dark veil, her sandals coated in dust from the road. She was no longer a child. Rome had taught her how to walk with her head high, how to speak only when spoken to, how to survive with a smile that revealed nothing. But when she entered the atrium of the Cornelian villa, the stillness clung to her throat like cobweb. No one greeted her. The old steward had died. Drusilla had vanished, married elsewhere, they said, after 2 miscarriages. Gaius, now gray and slower, sat alone beneath the family busts, sipping wine he no longer tasted. He called the girl child, not remembering the shape of her mother's face in her jawline. She did not correct him. She came to pay respect, she said. For what, she didn't know. That night, as the villa slept, she wandered the corridors her mother once walked. Some doors had been sealed, others repainted. But the hall to the northern wing remained untouched. Dust greeted her like an old friend. At the end, the hidden door still waited. She opened it. Inside, the portraits remained, some darker with time, others removed entirely. But Livia's was there, tucked in the far corner, a soft face with tired eyes. Not marked, not named, just another woman who had disappeared without dying. The daughter reached for it, hands trembling. Behind the frame, she found a thin scroll tucked into a crack in the wall. The wax had crumbled, the ribbon, frayed. She unrolled it slowly. The ink was faded, but legible. It was not a plea, not a goodbye. It was memory. Livia had written of the silence, the shame, the slow erasure, of the son who never breathed, of the daughter taken without farewell, of the portraits, of the fear that Rome would outlive its mothers by burying them quietly. The final line read, "If Rome forgets its mothers, it will bury itself childless." The girl read it 3 times, the words burning deeper each time. She did not cry. Not yet. She returned the scroll to the wall and straightened the frame. The next morning, she joined Gaius for breakfast. When he asked if she planned to marry, she smiled. "Perhaps," she said, "but only a man who remembers his mother's name." He laughed, not understanding. She did not explain. She left the villa at noon, veil lifted, eyes forward, and though she said nothing to the others on the road, she carried Livia's name like a blade hidden beneath her tunic, sharp, silent, and waiting. History remembers the conquerors, not the women they erased. Livia's story is one of thousands wives cast aside for failing to bear sons, daughters taken and renamed, mothers whose faces never made it into stone. Rome was built on the backs of women like her, and it buried them without mourning. If this story haunted you, let it, because silence was their punishment and remembering is the beginning of justice. Subscribe to Forgotten Stories Ancient World for more untold truths, and comment, "Remember Livia," if you believe her name should never be erased again.